So we just begin. All right.
Cool.
Hey guys, welcome to the fourth episode of the Wave Running Podcast. It's an honor to have Zach Aspinall join us today because he is my or ex co-worker, and I'll let him do the introducing and then we'll go straight into it. So can you give us a background of who you are, what you're doing now and stuff?
Yeah, sweet. Yeah, thanks. Thanks, Soda. Thanks for having me on the podcast. Super stoked to chat with you and see you again as well. Yeah, haven't chatted since you're in Australia, so got a lot to catch up on there. So yes, Zach Aspinall. I'm 25, and I'm working pace athletic at the moment. It's where Soda and I met each other, got into the running community probably 1 or 2 years ago. So we'll touch on that a little bit throughout the podcast. A little bit about myself. I grew up in Sydney, just out in the Hills district. Went to school out this way and studied engineering after school. So did that for 3 or 4 years, which was pretty exciting, challenging sort of stuff. Jumped into the engineering world after uni and worked in there for a couple of years. And then had a bit of a career change recently, which was interesting, but it's been exciting. So there's been a lot going on.
Yeah. And we also both train a little bit with Delta Running Project, which we'll go into a little bit later as well. But yeah, we kind of met at Pace Athletic, which is pretty cool because you started off as a customer and then now you're really heavily involved with the staff side of things. And, you're a big part of Pace from what I hear. And even when I was there, you were a big part of it, even though you're brand new. Like, I think you're one of the staff that I've come across that have taken the least amount of time to get their head around the admin and then play like a more important role at Pace, which we
Yeah,
call
well,
like a senior casual. Yeah.
yeah. And you were saying well, I mean, for people's context, you were the one that pretty much hired me and got me into the pace world. But I hope that I've continued your streak as well of hiring good people. So things have gone well so far.
Yeah, exactly. As Zach just touched on, I have this 100% streak of introducing great people to Pace Athletic to work there. So I hope it carries on if I do send anyone else to Pace. But yeah, I'm glad Zach has pulled through. And I had no doubt. As soon as I met him, I knew he was, suited for the job. He loves running. Yeah, and he's good at talking to people. And I think that's the two main qualities you need to work well at Pace anyway. So yeah, just ticking those boxes was perfect. And we'll touch on a lot more of that later on. But I think I want to start off with your kind of root and background because you're obviously Australian, but you were born in the US. So can you talk a bit about how long you spent in the US and like whether you feel like the US is a big part of your life or not really? And also, you obviously went to the Boston Marathon recently. So maybe also talk about the Boston Marathon experience.
Yeah, it's an interesting one, right? So my dad worked as a pilot in the Australian Air Force, and I think in 1996 he went over there for an exchange and worked in America for like 2 or 3 years, sort of thing. And I was just fortunate enough to be born like in that period when he was over there, so in North Carolina, over on the East Coast in America. So none of my family are actually American, funnily enough, but by birth, I was able to get an American citizenship. So I think I spent maybe a year, just over a year in the US in 1997, 98. And obviously I have basically no memory of it. But it's always been like a part of me. So I've got like my birth certificates, obviously, from America. I think when I was maybe 18 or 19, I was doing some travel over to Canada and I hadn't been to America physically at that stage. And I figured out I wasn't allowed into the country as an American if I didn't have a passport, right? So I didn't have a physical American passport. So I was like, okay, I need to actually sort this out. So got an American passport. And then since then, I've been able to travel into the country, work in the country, and it gives me the opportunity to to not need a visa. I can just go over there and pick up work whenever I want. So like during uni, for example, I did some snowboard instructing, and I was able to go over to Aspen, Colorado there, and yeah, just rock up in the country, and they're like, oh, like, where's your accent? Like, what's your story, sort of thing. Yeah, so people are a bit confused at first. Like the other week when I went into Boston, I got to like skip the line that all the normal tourists go into and just go into the American citizen line. And they're like, "Oh, welcome home, Mr. Aspinall." And there I am, like with my Aussie accent, and I feel a bit awkward in that sense. But yeah, it's a cool thing to have. Like I enjoy being American, and it's sweet to have those sort of opportunities that some other people, yeah, don't have there. So yeah,
Yeah, I haven't talked to many people about this before, but there's this concept of like unfair advantages in life. And I feel like, well, sometimes the unfair advantage could be completely out of your control. Sometimes it could be in your control, but the people that kind of succeed in life are really good at taking advantage of that unfair advantage. So it'll be cool to see you like even do a couple years of work in the US one day, just because you're able to, right? And you have the flexibility of experiencing it and then falling back to Australia if you want to, or you can stay there if you love it there. So I think, yeah, that's a pretty cool unfair advantage to have in life. And yeah, if you go to the US, I would definitely try and visit because I've always wanted to go there too. And, the more friends I have there, the easier it will be to go there because they can show me around and make sure I'm going to the right places and not, you know, going somewhere sketchy or whatever. So yeah, that'll be
yeah,
good. But
man, it's a big
um
country. Big country. That was one thing I was going to touch on when I went to America the other week. I sort of was sussing it out a little bit because I'd like to go and live there one day and just to see which parts of America are sweet. And the mountain areas is probably like for us as runners, those Rocky Mountain areas where there's a lot of the big trail races like the Leadville 100 and some of the others. Those are like the main areas that I think it would be awesome to go and live in, and then yeah, have people come and visit and do races together. I think that'd be awesome.
Yeah. Can you give us like a roadmap or like a rundown on all the places you visited in the US in this recent trip where you went to the Boston Marathon? Because I've lost track. I've seen a few stuff on your story. I think you went to New York for sure, but apart from that, I couldn't keep up. So yeah, that'll be great.
Yeah, fair. Oh, I covered yeah a fair amount of the country. Flew into LA and then connected straight over to New York City. So I'd never been to New York before. So spent a week there. Went to a basketball game. I was there with a few Aussie mates. My mate Emma and Greta, and we stayed in this really cool apartment just across one of the bridges in Long Island. So yeah, got immersed into the culture in New York City for a week there. Like I was saying, basketball. Went to Broadway. Went for a 12-kilometer run around Central Park, which for anyone that hasn't done before, Central Park is amazing. It was like you see it in the movies and everything, but to be there in person, it's kind of like a pinch me moment. Like you've seen it on the screens and stuff, but in person, it was sweet. So to do a run around there was kind of cool. Then did a bike ride around the city. Yeah, so that was sort of New York, and that's the next place I want to do my marathon as well, overseas marathon. So we can touch on that one a little bit later. Then caught the bus up to Boston, and I was in Boston for about 5 days. So there was just marathon stuff in Boston. Went to Harvard, went to a baseball game, but uh, more than anything, it was just getting ready for race day, getting my nutrition in order, going to the expo, picking up my bib, and then obviously running the marathon, and then flew over to Portland, Oregon, so right over the other side on the west coast, because I have a mate there from my university exchange. So went over there and we went to a place called Bend, Oregon. It's like in the mountains over there. So I did a bit of snowboarding, which probably not advisable 2 days after a marathon to hop on a snowboard and get on the mountain, but it was a good opportunity and I didn't want to pass it up. And then yeah, did some brewery hopping, and spent some time with friends, ate some food, and then yeah, got back on the plane back to Sydney after that.
Yeah, what a trip. I mean, I think the difference between like living somewhere and traveling somewhere is that like when you're traveling, you have way less time. So you want to try and cram everything in it as much as possible. So like you
Mhm.
said, even if you're small from the marathon, you feel like you have to kind of make the most of your time there and do everything you can. But it sounds like a pretty cool trip because you did a bit of everything, like brewery hopping as well. So yeah, that's pretty cool. And I guess the other thing I wanted to touch on was for the viewers. Well, I haven't been to Central Park yet, but I do know from hearing stories that on Strava you see the Central Park map and it looks not that big, but when you're actually there and you run like is it 10Ks or something all the way around
I
or
think,
8K?
yeah, maybe it is 10 kilometers. I think the run that I did was 12 Ks, but that included running across the bridge. So maybe it is, yeah, like
Yeah.
8 to 10 K sort of
Yeah,
thing.
it's like a lot bigger than it looks on Strava. So I definitely want to go and experience it for myself because I think my view of Central Park, just from looking at it on Strava, looks like, a 4K small park. But yeah, it just spans across the whole city, which is pretty cool. So I definitely want to go one day. But in terms of like living and traveling, it can be a really different experience. So I'm just wondering, how you touched on you want to live in like the mountainous areas, but I'm wondering if you liked any of the states or cities that you went to for traveling, like more than other parts, or more than other states.
Yeah, I think like New York City, for example, and I've had this conversation with a fair few people. In terms of a city to live in, it would be like a lot. There's a lot happening. It's very like it's expensive to live in. So from like a living point of view, you'd have to work really, really hard to make it there. And I feel like that would detract from like the living. It's got a lot going for it, right? Like it's got the central parks, and it's got the broadways, and it's got all the sports, and the cool restaurants, and cool culture. But I just feel like if you then had to go and work 60 hours, 70 hours a week, it would just detract from the living there. So as a place to travel to, insane, like loved every minute of it. But I don't think I would go that well living there. That was from my short experience of it. And then over the Boston, in comparison, I think Boston would be a city that I definitely could live in. It's like a harborside city, so it. I mean, I wouldn't compare it hugely to Sydney, but it's got a similar vibe. It's not like that huge city vibe that New York has, and I think it's similar. Sydney sort of has that going for it as well. It's not like a huge city vibe, but it's a place where you can live, you can play. Like there's lots happening around it. So Boston would be one that I probably would live in, not close to the mountains. And then Oregon was an interesting one. There was a huge like homeless sort of problem there. Cool city, but I saw a lot of like the problems that America has right at the like in my face sort of thing when I was traveling there just solo, and it yeah it kind of turned me off Portland as a city. So yeah, the experience was kind of good and bad, but that's the thing with America, right? Everyone knows there's these like systematic issues there, and yeah, I experienced a fair few of them. So it did make me question where I'd want to live. Like you'd want to be pretty sure about it.
Yeah, it just seems like every state is so different, like a whole different country kind of thing. So yeah, pretty cool. Again, I've never been there yet, but I would love to one day. I think the closest I've been is Hawaii
Yeah,
when I was like
nice.
really young, but yeah, definitely want to go to the big cities in the US one day.
Yeah, even
But yeah,
different again. Yeah.
yeah. Let's touch more on the marathon itself, because obviously that was a huge part of your trip. And I mean, if you weren't racing the marathon, you probably wouldn't have gone, because that's what you're talking about a while leading up to it when we were working together. But yeah, I guess what initially made you want to do the marathon there? Like, did you have friends doing it? And also, yeah, what was your training like leading up to it?
Yeah, well, as you can see, like I dressed for the occasion today. I've got my Boston Mara shirt on, repping it with pride. Yeah, Boston, it's an interesting one, right? So like the Boston Marathon within the running community, it's like, well, not the pinnacle, but like a lot of people see the Boston Marathon. It's like, yeah, everyone knows it. Everyone wants to qualify it. Everyone wants to get like that Boston qualifier. Which before I got into the running, I didn't really know anything about it. Everyone had kind of heard about Boston as well outside of running because of what happened 10 years ago with the bombings and stuff there. So it got a name for itself in that regard too. So when I started running back in 2021, my first marathon was Melbourne. And my goal at Melbourne was sub 3, which I was pretty naive at the time. I didn't really know what a sub 3 marathon meant, but I saw that everyone was talking about it. They're like, oh, sub 3, like that's what a lot of people aim for, just like your everyday runner. So I was like, okay, like let's go for it. Let's set an ambitious goal. So trained for that, and ended up getting the sub 3 in Melbourne. And then everyone's like, oh, you've got to do like this Boston Marathon. You've now qualified for it. And at the time I didn't really know what that meant, because I was just new to the whole scene. So did a bit of research, and I was like, oh, like it's this major marathon, everyone's talking about it, like it's the buzz. I was like, okay, I think I'm going to do Boston. That was in 2021. I wasn't guaranteed a spot with 2:58 that I run in Melbourne. So then I did Gold Coast last year in July, ran a 2:51 there, and I was like, okay, like let's do it. Let's sign up. So August last year, they released like the ballot sort of thing. So you then have to register for it, August or September. So you have to register for it then. You've got 2 days to register. You submit like your time and your details, and they take a deposit. And if you get accepted, you then get into the race. So luckily within a week, was accepted for it. And I was heading to Boston. Wasn't sure if I was actually going to make it to Boston. I've been injured with tendinitis in both my glutes to start off this year. And it basically had me running less than 20 Ks a week for probably the first 3 months this year, up until the end of February. So really wasn't sure whether I was going to make it there. Things started to improve, did a lot of physio, and managed to start ramping up my training again, and went into a marathon block. And was lucky enough to make it over there. And I had a goal just to go and have fun, right? So I was like, I'm just going to go and enjoy the experience. So went over there with no real expectations, but I just wanted to get amongst the whole vibe of it. So got into Boston. The expo there was just insane. So you don't actually get your bib like most other races, right? They send it out to you, or you go to the expo. But in the past, I've just had my bib sent to me in the mail. But the expo there at Boston is just like insane. Like they put you into like a massive warehouse sort of thing. You get ushered off into different sections depending on how you're ranked, because there's 30,000 people in the marathon. So myself and a few others went off into our section. They give you like this bag, and it's got your bib in there. It's got like all of these, like a Boston Marathon bottle opener, and like a game day magazine. Like the Americans, obviously, they love their sport. So it's like a game day magazine about Boston Marathon and like everything that's happening and how to get involved. So that was sweet. That was exciting. That was like when it was like, okay, now this is real. Like got the bib. Yeah, it's happening. And then there's the expo. I'm not sure. Have you heard of the Boston Marathon Expo?
Not much, to be honest.
Okay. So like I was warned beforehand, you need to be careful when you go there, or you need to take a lot of money, because Adidas sponsors the expo, and they've just got all of the gear that you can think of, the jackets, the long sleeve tops, the like splitty running shorts, running shirts. And I walked in there, I was like, oh, it's okay, I'm not going to spend much. I basically got one of everything, and fully kitted myself out in Adidas gear, which was it was sweet. That was on the Saturday. The race was on the Monday. So did a park run that day in Boston. So Lockie Oaks, I was there with my mate Emma Glendenning, who was also racing in it. So yeah, we went and did a park run. There's like 500 plus people sort of that did the park run. Just tried to get immersed in the whole the whole vibe of it. Because Boston, they just go marathon mad. So the whole city just turns into this running city for the entire weekend. Went to the carb loading and then got to the race there on Monday. Yeah, so that was leading up to the race for you.
Yeah, and then I guess go straight into the race as well, and then we'll talk about some other stuff or questions that came up to me during that.
Yeah, sweet. So the race, it's a weird one, right? So normally for a race, you would have the start line somewhere in the city, and you would potentially just do a loop around the city. But Boston is a straight, or what do you call it if it's it's
Just
not
point
out
to point.
point to
Point to
point,
point.
a
Yeah.
marathon. Yeah, so you get taken. There's hundreds of school buses, right, in the morning at like 6 a.m. and you get put on this yellow school bus, the typical American school bus. And
Yeah.
these hundreds of them just go up the highway with Boston Marathon runners in it. So they take you out there. It was freezing cold, like 6 degrees, foggy and misty. It hadn't started raining at that point. Then you get to Hopkinton, which is that town 42 kilometers out, and you wait there for about an hour and a half. They usher you off to the start line, and then the gun goes off. But bit of a weird, like strange experience compared to other marathons. You don't start until 10 o'clock. So went off at 10 o'clock. My goal was to negative split the race. So first 90 minutes, I was just going to take it sort of easy, just a little bit slower than my goal pace, which is around that 3 hour mark. For the first time ever, I had a bunch of like stomach cramps and issues in the first 21 Ks. So my gels just weren't sitting properly. I had to sort of like stop start a few times. So that I think on 4 occasions in the first half marathon, I was stopping and starting because I was just feeling like a lot of discomfort. Still somehow managed to come through in exactly 90 minutes through the half. So I was like, okay, that's good. But different to other marathons, they don't have paces. So you're just trying to find your group as you go. You get put in a corral at the start, which is based off your qualifying time. So mine was about 2:51. So other runners in that sort of speed or pace group. Anyway, because I was going slow, I sort of fell back and didn't find anyone to run with. So I was kind of just going on my own with thousands of others around. It's crazy like that because of the number of people that you're physically running with. Whereas like what we've experienced in the past, you're in small groups, right? And you're sort of working together in that sense. But this one, you're just surrounded by a stampede of runners, which it's something that I hadn't experienced before. The crowds are insane. So you run through 6 different suburbs during the race. And basically each suburb has tens of thousands of people just lining the streets with like instruments and screaming out your name and all that. And obviously that's like a huge help. And hadn't really experienced that before with the Aussie marathons. Like we have decent crowds, but nothing like that. So that helped a lot. And then second half marathon, I came good. So around 21 Ks, I was like, all right, I think I'm good. So I'm going to pick up my pace. So 25, 30K mark is where you come into, it's called the Newton Hills. So it's famous in the Boston Marathon for these 4 consecutive hills that you have to run up. And the last one is Heartbreak Hill. Similar. I don't know if Sydney named their Heartbreak Hill after this Heartbreak Hill, but it's meant to be a kind of similar hill. It was a letdown, to be honest. I actually didn't think it was as hard as people had made it out to be. Sydney's Heartbreak Hill, hands down, way harder. So I was able to run up there at like 4-minute pace, and in my head, I'm like, maybe I can bring this home in a sub 40 10K in the last 10Ks of the marathon. That didn't work out. It didn't pan out at all. I got to the top of Heartbreak Hill. I came over the top, and I just felt like this tweak in my left hamstring coming down the next hill. And I basically just told myself, all right, you got 6Ks to go. Just pull it back. Otherwise, there's a risk that I would go into a full body, not a full body cramp, but a full leg cramp. Yeah, and then just brought it home. It was pouring with rain in the last 5 kilometers, so the marathon just had like a bit of everything, which that's cool. Like you kind of want that. It wasn't the perfect race, but that's the marathon. Like you never get perfect conditions. You never have things go as you planned. So yeah, came into Boston, which is the last sort of suburb out of those 6 that I was talking about there. You make a few turns, which are the only turns in basically the entire race, and then you come down Boylston Street, which is the main street in Boston there, and you gun it for the finish line, and you get your glory sort of thing. But it was a bit different for me. Everyone was struggling. Like some people were passing out, and you could tell that it had taken its toll on a lot of runners. Anyway, myself and this other guy saw this guy in front of us who completely had basically hit the deck. His legs had stopped working, and we both looked at each other and we were like, do we just keep going and run the last 400 meters and just leave him on the ground, or do we help him up and take him over the finish line? So we decided to grab him and take him down the last 400 meters, which wasn't easy. Like he was a heavy guy and his legs weren't working anymore, but yeah, we didn't want to just leave him there, especially someone made it 41 kilometers, right? Imagine then not like DQing or not finishing, DNFing, because your legs stopped working. So went over the finish line and finished the Boston Marathon, which was pretty incredible experience.
Yeah, I did see I think it was a photo of you helping out the guy at the finish, which is still good to see because you traveled all the way there and you were still, willing to help people get over the finish line and help your fellow runners, which is very nice of you. And yeah, I think that shows that, truly everything that could have happened in the race, including the rain and all that. I was going to touch on earlier about how you did the Melbourne Marathon and the Gold Coast Marathon. You ran 2:58, 2:51, like 2 times that are crazy for some people, especially considering how short of a time period you've been running for. So I guess that kind of brings the question to mind: what made you, or what do you think are the few factors that made you get to a sub 3 so quick compared to other people?
Yeah. Well, like I'd be lying if I said like I wasn't someone that was super active before I started running. I listened to a few of your other podcasts. I know some of your other guests were talking about soccer and other sports they were playing. I think it was Luke that said that. I was a big soccer player and a midfielder in that sport. And I did a lot of running, and like I had the fast twitch muscle fibers, but I also had the endurance as well. I had to probably cover sometimes 10 kilometers a game. So I had that up my sleeve, and I think that definitely helped. Another one would have been just when I set a goal, I set an ambitious goal, and normally I'll achieve it. Like I'll work my ass off to get there. So that's another one. I saw a bunch of, like I was saying earlier, people that had posted like this 3-hour marathon. So I was like, okay, like I have the goal, I've got the time, I know the pace I need to run. I don't really know what I'm doing. Like I wasn't running with Delta or any other groups at that stage. I was just doing my own thing back in 2021. And all the training I did was just based off YouTube. Like I found a few runners, a guy called Nick Bear. He's this American supplements guy, and he's like 95 kilos. Anyway, he managed to run a sub 3 marathon at 90 something kilograms, which is just insane. Like compared to us, I couldn't imagine being close to 100 kilograms and going at like a 4:14 pace. So he had videos on YouTube about like sub 3 marathon and like what it sort of takes. So I watched a bit of that, and then just put together my own sort of training plan. But went from a zero base and just slowly built my way up. But I think that being active in the past definitely helped, and then being ambitious and being able to set goals definitely helped as well. And then I had a few things in 2021 that kind of worked in my favor as well. If you want me to touch on those
Yeah, you can
too.
briefly touch on them. Yeah.
Yeah. So like July 2021, you were here at that stage in
I think it
21?
was. Yeah.
Yeah. So we hadn't met at that point, but we went into a full like lockdown, right? So a lot of things got stripped away. So like sport, I was playing soccer, but that got stripped away. And I was just working from home. So given that I was active, I was like, well, I wanted to do something. So running was that thing that I'd done a lot in the past. Like when I was a kid, I was like a rep cross country runner, but didn't do it into my teenage years. And high school, I sort of gave it up. But I was like, I want to get back into it again. So built up from, I couldn't even run a 5K sort of at that point. That must have been July that year. Melbourne Marathon was in December. So I had like a 4-month period sort of there. And then just chipped away at it, slowly built up an aerobic base, and then saw that YouTube stuff and yeah, managed to put together some sort of program. But the luckiest part was October that year. There was a 1 Foot Forward campaign, which is the Black Dog Institute, and you set yourself a goal of how far you can run in a month. And I set myself a goal of 200 kilometers, right? So for some of us in the running community now, it's like, what, 200 Ks in a month? That's not much at all. But for me at the time, I was like 50 Ks a week. No way. I can't do that. But was able to just like set out those key runs each week. And all of a sudden I was like, oh, that wasn't awfully bad. And by the end of it, I was like, oh, I've actually got this fitness now. And then was able to use that for Melbourne going forward. And yeah, it's sort of taken me to where I am today.
Yeah, it's pretty cool how you came from like a soccer, or I know people in the UK love calling it football. And to be honest, I like calling it football as well because I grew up in a British school. But it's cool that you were a footballer, Luke was a footballer, because I was as well. I was a midfielder too. And
There you go.
obviously, everyone knows that the midfielder usually has to do the most amount of running. And in the professional football world, and I'm sure you've done this as well a few times, but I saw some stats saying people can run up to like, 18K or something in a football match. So obviously it depends on the size of the pitch and all that sort of stuff too. But I think that got me to a decent level where when I entered the running world, I didn't have to start from scratch. And I kind of just went straight into a 19-minute 5K and then shipped my times from there. So I never got to experience the full progression of like starting from completely nothing, like running and walking, alternating to, running what I'm at now. So I feel like I wish I got to experience going from completely scratch to where I'm now. But at the same time, it's a cool kind of concept that other sports can help with running too. And running probably helps with those other sports too. So yeah, I think COVID was a good time where a lot of people picked up running, even if they aren't doing it anymore. But like it would have helped them out in their own sport. And yeah, I think it's just an interesting time. Like I ended up running more because of the lockdown as well. I feel like I was just running maybe 40 Ks a week before COVID. And then COVID was when I did my first ever 100K week. And now I've done plenty of 100K weeks. And it's just like the standard now. Like I don't want to do anything less kind of thing.
Yeah,
And
definitely.
yeah.
Do you think that
um,
that COVID period really changed running like globally
yeah,
in
I feel like
terms
it
of
has.
popularity?
Yeah, like everyone talks about it. And obviously we only got to experience what it was like in Australia. But
Mm.
even for me, because I was working at Pace Athletic, which is the running shoe store that Zach and I both worked at, which we'll touch on more later. But even working there, we saw the increase in number of shoe sales and just people getting into it. Like every other customer that would come in would be like, "Oh yeah, I just picked it up, and I just want to make sure I'm in the right kind of shoe going forward." So yeah, it's just cool to see how big running has become. And honestly, those lockdowns definitely helped out with that. So yeah, I think it was good for our sport. Probably not for some other sports, but
No, that's it.
um,
Some silver lining from it, right? Like
yeah,
that time wasn't great for a lot of people, but at least there are some cool things that came out of it.
yeah, 100%. Yeah, going more into running, I guess give us more of a timeline on when you joined Delta because you talked about how you built your own program from watching the Nick Bear YouTube videos, but I want to know when you decided to take the plunge into Delta Running Project.
Yeah, this is a funny story to be honest that I haven't told that many people. I might have told you about this one, but before I did Melbourne Marathon, I decided to go onto their Facebook page, and like I was touching on earlier, I had no idea what I was doing running a marathon. It was the first real race that I'd ever run. And I was like, okay, I'll go on the page and I'll be like, oh, who's running? They have like a Melbourne Marathon Facebook page. Who's running sub 3? Like, is there anyone I can run with? Given I was in a different city. Anyway, I had probably 20 people reply, just like roasting me, being like, oh, look at this hot shot, thinking he can run sub 3 on his first attempt. And I was like, oh, like I had no idea that it would come across that way. Anyway, it did to a lot of people, and I found that interesting. But besides the point, there was this guy that popped up in the thread and was like, oh, like, don't, like, what are you guys doing, like roasting this guy for trying to set like a ambitious target. And it turned out that it was Keith Hong. And Keith, for a lot of people, would probably know him within the Sydney running community. He's a big sort of name, and he absolutely froths running. He reached out to me and was like, oh, hey mate, like, don't worry about those people. Like, I'm going to be running Melbourne Marathon, and I'll be around that sort of time. We found out actually at the time I was living in Neutral Bay that he lived 5 minutes down the road. Like, he was in Cremorne or Camaray, and he runs at Delta. For those that don't know, and he was like, oh, like, come for a run sometime. So we just did like a shakeout run a few weeks before Melbourne. He was telling me about Delta, and the community down there. And so I didn't run with them before Melbourne, but he invited me down for a session after Melbourne. So that was how I came across Delta, which was completely random. And I still laugh about that story to date. And then, started running with them after Melbourne. And they were, obviously that's been one of the big sort of step changes, having those Tuesday sessions and having the option of going for the long runs and stuff. It's a pretty awesome group with so many dedicated and passionate runners, which I'm always pretty grateful to have that at my fingertips and being able to run with those guys and girls.
I think one reason why I love this podcast is because a lot of like names get dropped and they get shout outs and stuff, but for a very good reason. Like Keith, you reminded me, is like one of the most like nicest people I've ever met. And everyone can kind of agree with me because, it's hard to come across Keith when he's not being positive or anything like that. He's always willing to have a chat and be supportive of your ambitious goals and help you get there and give you advice and all that. And I think a good way that I heard someone describe it, I think it was the owner of Pace Athletic, Will. Not sure if he's listening, but shout out to him if he is. He was just talking about how, he's so willing to help and he always like reaches out. And sometimes it can come across as, wow, what does he want in return for this? Like there must be something, but he just doesn't want anything in return. He's purely just wanting to help people out. And I feel like, well, I'm not saying it's hard to come across people like that in the world, but it's just so cool to see Keith always trying to reach out, help out. And he never wants anything in return. He just wants to see you succeed. So huge shout out to Keith. Another person I want to get on the podcast. I think all these podcasts are just reminding me of who else I need to get on in the future.
Yeah. So, hey, it's all the Delta crew as well. There's a bit of a trend going on. But he's one of the most selfless guys that I've met. So I thank him honestly for getting me into all the running, because he's been a big part of my journey so far.
And another person that I want to touch on a little bit is, how you talked about how you had that glute med injury, or not injury, tendinopathy. I guess it is an injury, that stopped you from running as much as you wanted. And you said someone helped you out with it. Is that Maddie Parker, if I'm not mistaken?
Yeah, that was Maddie from the running room. So after Bondi to Manly, the ultra last year, that's where the tendinopathy kind of came from. And it took a month to surface because I had another injury and I hadn't been running. And then I started running again, and this tendinopathy was obviously just hiding there in the background. So went and saw Maddie at the running room there in Manly. And she was so helpful. I love physios and specialists. Well, she's a podiatrist, but specialists that are sort of in line with your goals. they're not too conservative, that that they're like, oh, take 2 months off, like you can't run at all. But they work through like a process, like, okay, so what do you want out of this? And I was like, well, I'm doing Boston next year. In April, I wanted to do the more than a run, 80 or 60K in then November last year. And so we worked towards something, which she was super helpful with.
Yeah, in my personal opinion, I think the goal of, a podiatrist or a physio helping out a runner that's injured is to make sure that they can still do what they want to do to an extent. Obviously with less load and intensity and all that, but it's so easy for anyone, like even if they're not qualified, to just go, all right, rest and you'll feel better. But I think there is more to it. And especially if you dig into the research, you can find out stuff about how tendons shouldn't be like completely rested. You actually want to stimulate it a bit, strengthen it as well after a little bit of like less loading stuff, which another specialist can go into detail on that when they come on the podcast. But yeah, it's all about kind of strength and trying to have a little bit of a stimulus still so that it's not completely at rest. And yeah, I think the people that look into that and make sure that happens with their patients are the true specialists that know what they're doing. So you never want to go into a physio and then just be told to rest, because that's not how it works. Unless you have like a bone stress injury or whatever. But yeah, again, I don't know too much about that, so I think I'll get someone proper to talk about that. But
it's different cases. Yeah, for sure.
I think the running room is a great place to go if you do have like running related injuries, obviously, because a lot of them do run and know their stuff. And people like Maddie Parker used to work at Pace Athletic as well. So she knows her shoes as well. So she knows how the shoe can affect where the load goes and stuff like that, which definitely helps too, because she can refer you to Pace Athletic to get a certain type of shoe that can help with that sort of running. I personally used to go to the running room in Clovelly, and yeah, definitely good bunch of guys. Highly recommend. And hopefully we can get Maddie on the podcast as well down the line.
That's it. You definitely should. I think I'll add one more thing to that. And we chatted about this before I even started the pace. I think we had this conversation. It highlighted to me the importance of strength and conditioning, because I neglected that a little bit before I did that ultra marathon. And that was where that tendonitis came from. So yeah, now that I'm doing 2 to 3 days of strength a week, it's made so much difference. So yeah, but I'd throw that one in there as well.
Yeah, I do have a question actually, just because I'm only just getting into my strength and I do it like once a week at the moment. But with doing like 3 strength sessions or even 1 or 2 for the people listening, how would you spread it out throughout the week so that it's not affecting key stuff like your long runs or an interval workout? How do you spread it out?
Yeah, well, like when I used to go to the gym, I always thought, oh, you have to be in the gym for an hour. Like if you're not in the gym for an hour, you're not doing it properly. But I just focus on my core exercises, like my compound exercises. So squats, deadlifts, bench presses, my core, and I'll just spread those out over my 2 or 3 sessions. And at the start of every session, I'll do all my mobility work. So for me, it's targeting my hips and my glutes, my calves, hamstrings, like all the little things, rolling myself out, just getting my body ready for the exercise that I'm going to be doing, but also just focusing on mobility, because that's the one thing that we sort of ignore sometimes as runners is we do all these, we're always putting this load through our legs and everything sort of tenses up and gets tight. So you have to do those exercise and releases to sort of relieve tension and stress. And then, like I said, I'll focus on just those core exercises. I'll do my deadlifts. I'll do some isometric exercise. So just like target one leg. So it'll just be like 2 or 3 exercises for each body part. And for me, I'm only in there for like 45 minutes max, and I'm out the door. So I have a plan going in. I'll know what I need to do, and then I'll get out, and that's worked for me so far. It's not a one size fits all. Like some people might prefer to be in there for longer, but that's how I've done it, to try and fit it around a busy schedule, right? Like we work, like we study, we run. So to try and fit it all in, that's my principle, is just focus on the main body parts and then do a little bit of mobility each session.
Yeah, cool. Going back more to Pace Athletic to wrap up the podcast, I guess talk about like the things the staff at Pace Athletic have in common because it's quite a strong team. And during my 2 years there, like I feel like we never really had a time where we had a bunch of staff that are super new, didn't know what they were doing in week, and everyone seemed to learn quite quickly because you get kind of thrown in the deep end at Pace, and I feel like
Mm.
that's the best way to learn. But what sort of qualities do you think someone that's new starting to work at a running shoe specialty store would need to have to succeed as a staff there?
Yeah, I think I've had this like chat with a few of our colleagues, and even with you. But the main thing is like being personable with people that come into the store. Everyone has like a reason why they're coming in. It might be that they're just looking, but they also might have a big race coming up. They might be coming back from injury. They might have this goal that they're working towards. They might just be starting to run again. So everyone has like a why as to why they're coming in. So being able to try and figure that out and talk to people is like probably the core part. It's all well and good knowing what a shoe, like what drop there is on a shoe, or like what the carbon plate specs are in a shoe, and like all the trail shoes and apparel and whatnot. But if you don't know what the person is looking for, well then you can't put them in the right thing. So yeah, for me it's being able to talk to people, trying to find out who they are, what they do, and why they're in the store, why they want to run. Whether they do want to run, they might not want to run at all, they might want to walk. But that's the first step, and then you can get into the sales part, and you need to know the tech and you need to know the shoes. But for me it's that personability is the number one. Would you agree with that, or do you have anything that you think you'd add to it?
Yeah, 100%. I think that's by far the most important because if you're not really engaging and personable, it's pretty hard to for the customer to have a nice experience and want to come back as well. So long term wise as well, I think it's important to be personable, but also just to gain your initial trust. Like if you go straight into, this is on sale, this is the right shoe for you, it seems like you're kind of pushing your product or whatever. And luckily at Pace, we don't have any commission or anything, so we're not stressed about selling to every single customer that walks in, which is nice. But yeah, personability, 100% important. And like I said, after that, tech does become important because you do want to know if to a certain degree about the tech as well. But what I find is that it's good to try and categorize the shoes so that you don't have to memorize everything and just know how different characteristics of a shoe can affect where the load goes. So if it's flexible, it's going to keep the load within the ankle and the foot. If it's not flexible, if it's stiff, whether because there's a carbon plate or high stack, it loads up the knee and the hip more because the shoe doesn't flex, meaning your foot doesn't flex, and the joint above has to compensate and take more of the load, basically. So, yeah, knowing small stuff like that, how the drop of a shoe can affect where the load goes, can help go a long way. And, you'll be able to memorize more shoes without having to remember exact details, basically. So, yeah, I think categorization is a great way to learn shoes because it is overwhelming going into a shoe store for work as well and having to learn all these shoes. I'm sure Zach can agree because, you had a couple shoes to start off with, but you definitely had a ton of shoes that you didn't know about at the start, right?
Yeah, it's overwhelming. Like you go in there and you've got like this wall in front of you, and there's 40, 50 different shoes, and you're like, yeah, I've run in like maybe three or four of these. So it can be overwhelming to start off with. But like you said, once you start to know the different categories of shoes, you can put some together, and it's easier then to talk about each of the characteristics and then put someone into the right shoe.
And another question I wanted to ask is, I feel like when I've worked with you, we've somehow come across so many interesting customers with different jobs that you never expect. So I guess talk to me about maybe one or two customers that you remember who have like a super interesting background or like an
Mhm.
interesting job. Because I remember we talked about this quite
Yeah.
a lot.
I know,
Yeah.
and I think I know the one like you're talking about as well. We met a gentleman, I think one day that was coming in looking for golf shoes. Do you remember this particular day?
I think so,
And
yeah.
yeah, and he's like, oh, are there any shoes on the wall that I could play golf in? So we were chatting through some of the options. Like for golf, you want something with a little bit of grip on the bottom so that when you're going through your swing, you're not going to slip out. So we looked at a few of the trail shoes. We're not a golf store at all. So we don't have golf shoes, but we were just trying to work through what he could potentially use for golf. Anyway, he was probably in the store for about an hour and a half. And yeah, his background was so interesting. I think his dad was a diplomat and he grew up overseas somewhere. He moved to Australia at some stage. He said to us, I think all the packaging in this store comes from my particular company. Or all of the packaging in any store comes from my company. Like he would make the glass jars or the cardboard boxes for maybe shoes, for example, or for stuff in a grocery store. So yeah, it just showed like the dynamic nature and like the diversity that we get that comes through the door, and being able to try and problem solve and help those types of people. But the best part of it is having the like conversations and seeing where they can go, because the conversations can go in a lot of different directions. But that's the cool part of it, is that you can have good conversation and then also sell to the customer at the same time and get them into something that they're after.
Yeah, it's such a different kind of work environment compared to corporate, right? And I did want to touch on this a little bit, I guess, when you first mentioned about how you worked at corporate. But
Mm.
yeah, I guess obviously the work environment is super different, but maybe go into a bit of detail on the specifics on what's different.
Yeah, well, corporate is it's more rigid. Like I was in the corporate space for about 3 years, work as an engineer. So did some design work, so putting together like construction drawings and whatnot, and then did some project management work. So my typical day in a corporate job would be I'm at a desk all day long. I'm jumping into meetings probably for half the day. I'm then focusing on my work, so putting together drawings or doing other tasks. Sometimes you're not fixed. So a typical day might go until 6, 7 o'clock at night. Like I might work extra hours, and it's good. Like it's a challenging work environment. You have to be very dynamic. Like you have to be able to communicate and prioritize and whatnot. And at the end of the day, you're trying to deliver something for a client. It's not too dissimilar to then when you go into a job at Pace Athletic, where your client is basically the customer and they have a specific need that you're trying to problem solve and work through and deliver a product for them. But the good thing about Pace, which I've found, has been the flexibility. Corporate says they're flexible, and they are flexible in some ways, but you're still expected to get a job done, and that might take you 50, 60 hours a week, and you have to spend that time on it. Whereas at Pace, I've enjoyed the flexibility of like, okay, you come in, you work your shift, your 8 hours, and then you clock off at the end of the day, and you can go on a run, or you can go to the gym, or you can go home. So I've enjoyed that flexibility of it so far, and I enjoy that process of problem solving. Like I'm an engineer by trade, so problem solving's what I've worked on for my whole schooling career to date. So it's the same thing when you're in a workplace. You're thinking on the go, and you're trying to get a job done. So yeah, that's a little bit of the main comparisons I can think of.
Yeah, definitely. I think the problem solving attributes that you have are another factor that helped you get into pace, which is amazing. And yeah, I think one other major difference with corporate is that with corporate work, you kind of have this huge hierarchy and career path and career progression that you want to make each year or every 3 years. But at pace, it's like all the positions are quite similar. I feel like there's not much difference between a casual and then a manager. And then on top of that, it's only the owners basically. So I feel like the progression is a lot quicker at pace, which is pretty cool because, I never thought I would be a manager at a shoe store, but at the age of 22, I just randomly got offered a contract for a manager role, which is amazing. And, I loved every minute of it. And like I said, it's a lot of problem solving. So I did have to like think a lot about how we can make the store perform better, but also keep the customers happy and, work around different issues like warranties and all that. So yeah, definitely gained a lot of experience from it. And the most important skill I think I gained from working at Pace would probably be the people skills, just like being able to talk a lot. And unlike you, I would say I wasn't good at it before I worked at Pace. So I don't know how I got hired, to be honest. And fun fact, when I actually first got hired, I think the person interviewing me wasn't too big a fan of me. Like, he was like nice guy, but I don't know if he's fit for the job. But I think the owners were like, let's give him a go, see how it goes. And then yeah, a few years later, they actually told me about the story, which is pretty funny.
Nice.
But yeah, they were glad they gave me a chance, even though I had like no experience. So yeah, I feel like the owners of Pace are really, nice in terms of giving an opportunity for everyone and giving them a go. So
Well, they can see
yeah,
potential as well. I think that's the main thing, and it paid dividends with you. Like they gave you an opportunity there at the start, and you became one of the biggest, if not the biggest asset that Pace has had for the last few years. So yeah, it's worked for them in the past, and I value that for sure. That the bosses and stuff can see something in people, and they help. Like there's good mentoring and stuff. Like I see that from our bosses and stuff, that they like to see the growth of people that work at Pace. So yeah, it's been a sweet place to work at so far.
yeah, 100%. Well, thank you, Zach, for coming on the podcast. It's been a great chat, actually. I think we're approaching like an hour or something. So yeah, good chat, and I'm sure we'll keep in touch. And yeah, I guess, do you have any quick closing remarks?
Thanks. No, it's been great to get on here with you, and I mean I'm keen to see how this goes, but also I'm keen to run with you again soon. You're obviously doing some cool things over there in Japan at the moment, so yeah, keen for when our paths cross next.
Yeah, I'll keep you posted on when I'll be back and stuff like that.
Thanks, Ada.